Well, what is autism spectrum disorder?
The reality is that it's not really a disorder. It's a description of some symptoms that quite often go together. There's a definition, right? So you can go to the, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, and if you look at that, it'll say that it's a disorder of developmental onset, and it's defined by behavioral changes. So it's defined by impairments in social interaction and social communication with also repetitive or restrictive behaviors. Now, that's quite a kind of cold definition. It's almost certainly a sort of massive catch-all of many, many, many different disorders that actually kind of segue into complete normality, actually. And that's, I think, why it's been so difficult to sort of study and unpick. There've now been a lot of genetic studies, right? So the last couple of decades has been incredibly rich in identifying the genetics of autism, which, by the way, is highly heritable, has one of the strongest genetic components of any neuropsychiatric disorder, which comes as a surprise to some people. But that means that, everyone was like, well, we're gonna find something. I mean, we're gonna find the gene or the genes. And of course they found hundreds of genes.
Yeah.
At least hundreds of genes. And that actually doesn't really surprise me because, it's not like some skin cancer or something, right? Where you can clearly see something and you can look at it under a microscope and it's got a histology and it shows a certain kind of pattern of behavior. This is really like just describing something and giving it a name, and it's very artificial. When I was at medical school, I did some history of medicine research into a disorder called dropsy. And so back in the 18th century, dropsy was this disease where everything swells up, right? So your abdomen swells up, your ankles swell up, everything swells up. And so they gave it its name. They didn't really understand it, and they knew everything was swelling up, so they would sort of try and treat it by, taking fluids off you, sort of bleeding and, leeches and stuff, right? And eventually everyone worked out that actually you can get swelling because you've got heart failure, or because you're not absorbing properly in your gut, or because your kidneys are failing. And so now there's no such thing as dropsy. There are all these other things that we actually do understand. And I slightly think that autism spectrum disorder is almost a bit like that. We've defined autism by a behavioral phenotype, right? So we're asking psychiatrists to assess your social interaction, right, or your communication skills, and then they kind of, they have a little chart and they work out, and you then get handed your diagnosis. So there is no other test for autism, right? There's no blood test or brain scan or anything like that. It's just a description of something that we can see, but we don't really understand. And it's not a single disorder. It's probably not even a few disorders like dropsy. It's probably many, many, many different ones that have been sort of thrown into a pot together. Now, I kind of can't help thinking that if only there was better behavioural phenotyping, surely we would at least be able to break it down a bit better. There's actually a real effort a few years back to change these behavioural descriptions into something that was maybe more sophisticated, had more granular detail, and maybe mapped onto what our understanding of neural circuits better. And somehow that sort of fizzled out, and I'm still actually trying to get to the bottom of why that was. And I do think that there may be some mileage in that. Having said that, I do worry that, because of the way we've defined it, we're just always going to be slightly stuck, because we're looking at this sort of final common outcome, right? Like the dropsy, like the swelling. It's the thing you can see, it seems obvious, but actually the cause of it can be many, many different things. And if you understand how you get there, then you suddenly kind of sort of break it down and dissect out your groups. So I suspect that focusing on human behavior may not be the kind of may not result in the aha moment. But I still think it's worth doing.
If you enjoyed that short podcast clip, then be sure to click on the full podcast that you can watch here.